Picture this: you come home from a long day at work, ready to relax, only to find a stack of envelopes waiting for you. Not bills, not friendly letters, but violation notices from your homeowners association. Your grass is a quarter-inch too long. A kid's toy was left on the lawn for 5 minutes. Your trash can was visible from the street for an hour past the designated time. It sounds absurd, right? But for one homeowner, this was just the beginning of a full-blown war. This wasn't just about petty rules. It was a targeted campaign. He first got suspicious when the notices started piling up, one after another, for the most trivial things imaginable. It felt personal. The final straw came one evening when he was taking out the trash and overheard voices from his neighbor's open window, where the HOA board was having a meeting. He heard his address. He heard them talking about making his life so miserable he'd have no choice but to sell. They wanted his property, and they were willing to play dirty to get it. He knew then that this was more than a simple disagreement. This was a coordinated attack on his home, his sanctuary. And he decided right then and there that he was going to roll over and let them win. If they wanted a fight, he was going to give them one they would never forget. The HOA's harassment escalated almost immediately. Suddenly, there were inspectors showing up at all hours. They weren't official city inspectors, of course. Just board members and their buddies, armed with clipboards and tape measures. They'd stand right at the edge of his property line, peering into his yard, taking pictures, and loudly discussing imaginary violations. They were trying to intimidate him, to make him feel watched and unwelcome in his own home. One morning he found one of them measuring the distance between the blades of grass on his lawn. It was pure harassment, designed to break his spirit. They sent him warnings about the color of his garden hose. They claimed his welcome mat was non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. Every day brought a new, more ridiculous complaint. It was a constant barrage of psychological warfare. But instead of breaking him, it fueled his resolve. He knew they were pushing the boundaries of what was legal, and he decided it was time to push back. This wasn't just about his lawn anymore. It was about defending his rights as a homeowner. So, he hit the books, not novels, but a deep dive into city ordinances, county property laws, and the HOA's own bylaws. He spent hours in the local library and online, cross-referencing every single rule they had thrown at him. He discovered something fascinating. The HOA's authority was not as absolute as they wanted residents to believe. Their power ended precisely at his property line. But more importantly, he found a legal gray zone. The bylaws were specific about what couldn't be on his property, but they were surprisingly vague about what could be. There were rules about permanent structures, but very few about temporary decorations, and that's where he saw his opening. The HOA had started a war of attrition, and he was about to launch his counteroffensive using their own rulebook against them. This was his home, and he was about to turn his property line into a battlefield of creative compliance. With his newfound legal knowledge, the homeowner began his retaliation. The HOA wanted to control his property's appearance. Fine, he would give them an appearance they would never forget, all while staying perfectly within the law. The first phase began with the fence. The bylaws said nothing about color, so he bought several gallons of the most obnoxious eye-searing neon paint he could find. One weekend, the entire stretch of fence facing the HOA president's house was transformed into a dazzling, almost radioactive, display of neon pink, lime green, and electric orange stripes. It was hideous. It was beautiful, and it was 100% compliant. Next, he turned his attention to the garden. The HOA had complained about a single out-of-place lawn ornament, so he gave them a whole army. He ordered dozens of garden gnomes online, but these weren't your average cheerful gnomes. He spent an evening customizing them, painting them in full camouflage, giving them tiny, non-firing replica rifles, and arranging them in tactical formations along the property line. He had gnome snipers in the bushes, and a gnome platoon storming a decorative rock. He even positioned one, holding tiny binoculars, to be permanently staring into the HOA president's living room window. The final touch was the lighting. The HOA had rules about the wattage of exterior light bulbs, but not the quantity or direction. So he installed a series of high-intensity motion-activated security spotlights. These weren't just for security, they were weapons. He carefully aimed them so that any time an inspector approached his property line after dark, they would be blasted with the blinding intensity of 1,000 suns. The once quiet suburban street now looked like a Las Vegas nightclub had crash-landed in a war zone. The complaints stopped being about the length of his grass and started being frantic calls about the visual assault on the neighborhood. His property had become a monument to malicious compliance, and the war had truly begun. The climax arrived on a Saturday morning. The entire HOA board, led by their furious president, marched up to his property line. They were holding a thick binder, presumably filled with every violation, real or imagined, they could think of. They were red-faced and yelling before he even opened his front door. "This has gone too far," the president shouted, gesturing wildly at the neon fence and the gnome army. "This is a violation of community standards. This is an eyesore. You are destroying the aesthetic of this neighborhood." The homeowner calmly walked out onto his porch, holding a cup of coffee in his own, much thinner binder. He let them finish their tirade. When they finally paused to take a breath, he spoke calmly and clearly, which by law specifically, Am I violating?" he asked. The president sputtered, fumbling through his binder. The General Aesthetic Clause, Article 5, Section B. It says all properties must be maintained in a way that is harmonious with the community. The homeowner smiled. "I'm glad you brought that up," he said, opening his own binder. According to City Ordinance 7.43, aesthetic harmony is legally unenforceable without specific, measurable standards, which our bylaws lack. "As for my decorations," he continued, "the bylaws have no rules on paint color for fences. They have no rules limiting the number or theme of temporary lawn art. And my security lights are all commercial grade and installed to code. What you call an eyesore," he said, taking a slow sip of his coffee, "I call artistic expression. And I'm afraid your personal taste doesn't have any legal standing here." A stunned silence fell over the board. They looked at their binder, then at the homeowner, then at the tactical gnome staring back at them. They had built their power on intimidation and vague rules, and he had just dismantled their entire case with cold, hard facts. They had no legal leg to stand on. They had poked the bear, and the bear had just shown them it had a law degree. And so, the great HOA war ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Defeated and humiliated, the board members turned and retreated, their threats and blustering dissolving into muttered complaints. The homeowner stood victorious on his porch, a king in his castle of neon and gnomes. He had fought for his home and won. The inspectors stopped coming. The violation notices ceased. He had proven that sometimes the best offense is a good offense, especially when that offense involves bright paint and a deep understanding of local ordinances. He showed them, and the entire neighborhood, that you can't bully someone who knows their rights. And every morning, as he enjoyed his coffee, the sight of his tactical gnome army served as a silent, hilarious reminder of the day he took on the HOA and won. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story of sweet, malicious compliance, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a crazy HOA story of your own. See you in the next video.